When it was first published in 1762, the social contract was met with outrage and censorship. Rousseau became a wanted man both in France and in his native Genoa. However, 32 years later, in 1794, after the French Revolution, his remains were transported to the Pantheon in Paris and he was buried as a national hero. The social contract was the foremost influence on the intellectual development of the French Revolution. Rousseau's primary aim in writing the social contract is to determine how freedom may be possible in civil society, and we might do well to pause briefly and understand what he means by freedom. In the state of nature, we enjoy the physical freedom of having no restraints on our behavior. By entering into the social contract, however, we place restraints on our behavior which make it possible to live in a community. By giving up on our physical freedom, however, we gain the civil freedom of being able to think rationally. We can put a check on our impulses and desires and thus learn to think morally. The term morality only has significance within the confines of civil society, according to Rousseau. Not just freedom, then, but also rationality and morality are only possible within civil society, and civil society is only possible if we agree to the social contract. Thus, we do not only have to thank society for the mutual protection and peace it affords us, we also owe our rationality and morality to civil society. In short, we would not be human if we were not active participants in society. Rousseau begins the social contract with the notable phrase, "Man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains." These chains result from the obligations that each person has to the community. According to Rousseau, this sense of communal duty is founded upon convention. He denies that a legitimate political authority can be found in the state of nature, as the oldest and only natural society, he says, is the family. If a legitimate political authority cannot be found in the state of nature, he says that it also cannot be founded upon force. People obey those stronger than themselves out of necessity, not by choice. Thus, the right of the strongest cannot create the sense of a duty that is necessary to establishing a true right. In addition, because strength is a relative term, the effect of this right changes with the cause. As soon as one person makes himself the strongest, all previous claims established on the right of the strongest are nullified. Thus, the primary flaw with this right is that it can be broken legitimately. Because no man has a natural authority over other men, and because force cannot establish right, all legitimate authority must depend upon convention. Rousseau thus seeks the basis for a legitimate political authority in which people must give up their natural liberty. People form societies when the obstacles faced in the state of nature become too arduous for any one person to overcome. Each person gives up his natural liberty, the freedom to do anything he desires, in exchange for the greater power of the entire community. Because everyone gives himself and all of his rights to the community, the conditions of the social contract are equal for all those involved. The association of many individuals with the same interests creates a collective body with its own life and will, and this body is called the state when it is passive, and the sovereign when it is active. The sovereign cannot do anything that harms the social contract because that would result in its dissolution. In addition, because it is formed by the association of private individuals, the sovereign cannot have interests that contradict with those of its members. The same is not true about the relations of subjects to the sovereign. Each person may have a private interest that interferes with or even harms the general will, but this social contract requires an individual to act in accordance with the common interest. This is Rousseau's solution to the problem of legitimate authority, called the social contract, an agreement by which the people band together for their mutual preservation. This act of association creates a collective body called the sovereign. The sovereign is the supreme authority in the state and has its own life and will. The sovereign's interest, or the general will, always promotes the common good. This is in contrast to the private will of each citizen, which strives only for personal good or personal benefit. The law expresses the general will and must only make regulations that affect the entire populace. The goal of legislation is to protect liberty and equality and to promote the common good. However, because the populace often does not know how to pursue the common good, Rousseau asserts that there must be a guide to help the people in making the law. This guide, who Rousseau calls the legislator, ensures that the law supports the preservation of the state. This legislator protects the law from being manipulated by private wills and also aids the people in weighing the short term benefits of a decision against its long term costs. The legislator must thus be an extraordinary person in many respects. He must be extremely intelligent and he must be able to resist the passions of the people while still taking an interest in their happiness. He must also be able to consider the present and future when making the law, and he is in a position to transform human nature, to substitute a moral existence for a physical one in the state of nature, and to strengthen the power of the state. And although the legislator is of a superior intellect, the people must approve his proposals before they become laws. Although the sovereign exercises legislative authority, the state also needs executive power to implement the general will. There are three main types of government: democracy, aristocracy, and monarchy. The type is chosen based on several factors, including population and climate. Smaller governments have more force than larger ones, and the population becomes more unruly as it grows. Rousseau thus argues that in general, there should be an inverse relationship between the size of government and the size of the population. Thus, large states should have a monarchy, intermediate states should have an aristocracy, and small states should have a democracy. Rousseau asserts that the establishment of government is not, as philosophers such as Hobbes and Grotius have argued, a contract. The sovereign employs the government as a representative of the people in charge of carrying out the general will. The sovereign thus can alter the form of government and replace its leaders as it chooses. As the natural tendency of every government is to usurp sovereignty and to invalidate the social contract, the government's interests are always in conflict with those of the sovereign. The best means of restraining the executive is holding periodic assemblies. And although this may seem difficult, Rousseau cites ancient Rome to show that this can be achieved even in large states. When the people convene, they must decide whether they approve of the current form of government and their leaders. When voting, each person must assess whether a law is in accordance with the general will, not whether it supports his private interests. Thus, he has an obligation to follow even those laws to which he does not give his consent. In a healthy state, people share common sentiment and show unanimity in the assemblies. In a declining state, however, people place their private interests above the common good and try to manipulate the legislative process. Although the sovereign must allow for the religious freedoms of its members, it can impose a set of laws that are necessary to being a good citizen. This system of beliefs, which Rousseau calls civil religion, consists of belief in a God and the afterlife, universal justice, disapproval of intolerance, and respect for the sanctity of the social contract. The state has the power to banish from the state anyone who opposes the tenets of civil religion. This aspect of civil religion in the works of Rousseau is a bit controversial because it goes against what he initially confessed. He stood up for individual liberty, but towards the end of his book, The Social Contract, in book 4 of this book, he goes against what he initially confessed by saying that there has to be some sort of a civil religion in which people have to agree to these following things, such as belief in God, belief in the afterlife, and all those virtues that he also supports. This clearly goes against individual liberty.